let's talk about hiring teams. So when you think about recruiting at massive scale, what are a couple of the fundamentals that people need to keep in mind and remember or get right, that you think about as a framework for how you scaled that much growth for hiring?
Yeah, a great question. And I think, with the benefit of hindsight, I can probably speak a little bit more intelligently to it than I could at the time. So I think the first thing that's just so important that you hear time and time again, but I think that just there is sort of no amount of time that you can spend that is too much, is getting your foundational team, your founding team, your sort of first team right. In my case, I had the benefit of building out a team in San Francisco and was able to sort of get two of the top reps, my friends Alex Netch and Andrew Case, both of whom became very close friends and were at my wedding, and to this day are still very close friends. We're sort of the top reps in San Francisco, and we're able to get them to move out to Arizona with me. And so having that institutional knowledge just like there on the ground made such a big difference, because there's already this like dynamic of what excellence looks like for every new hire that comes in.
Yep.
And I think that that's really important. And I think that for folks that are starting a new role or coming into a new environment, if you're in a sales leadership position, whether you're an SDR manager or a VP of sales or a VP of marketing or whatever the case may be, you should probably already know who the first 2 or 3 people that you're going to recruit and hire into the organization are going to be. And the reason for that is because you can create an environment that you've got a little bit more control over and create a culture that you're comfortable with and familiar with, and that you can help sort of integrate your new people into. Because once you start to add new folks onto the team, if you don't already have that like foundational culture in place, you can't go back in time and rebuild it. And that can be sort of like a recipe for disaster. And so I was very fortunate to have benefited from that without necessarily prioritizing it. But it's something that I've learned now over the years, that you can't really spend enough time in the beginning recruiting and focusing on like who is going to be my like founding go-to-market team.
Yep, that makes sense. Then we need to get into the actual operations of hiring that many people. Can you give us an understanding of what are some of the best practices from a recruitment perspective that you need to nail when you're hiring at scale?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's a great question. And we went through many iterations of this. We went through sort of me being the sole owner of sort of top to bottom recruiting for this organization, to having an internal recruiting team of 15 recruiters that were sort of running an engine. And so I saw kind of every evolution along the way. And I think there were a couple takeaways that I recommend to folks when I talk to them. And so the first one is like when you think about your role as a leader, like at the end of the day, it's your call, and it's sort of like the success or failure of the sort of decisions that you make when you hire people rest on your shoulders. And so when you think about like what is the highest point of leverage that you have throughout the entire recruiting process, in my opinion, it's kind of 2 things. One, it's like setting the tone in terms of look for and what our criteria are, and making that very evident so that everybody who's involved with the recruiting process is aligned on the same page, right? So sort of defining the role, but also sort of making sure that you like walk the walk in terms of like the team that you're building along the way. So it's sort of self-represented. And the second thing is like when you think about the leverage that you have as a leader or a hiring manager, it's actually like the sort of final stage interviews and the decision of like go, no go, and the ability to close candidates, and then sort of everything that happens after that in terms of the successful ramp and management of the team. And so the thing that I suggest to most folks is like, please negotiate with your CEO or the leader or the person you're recruiting to, whether you've got internal recruiting resources or outsourced external resources. Like you need the support in terms of like prospecting and management. Like we've proven in so many different aspects of the business, and we can take sales as an example, that like specializing the sales process in terms of appointment setters and like deal closers is just like more effective. And from a recruiting standpoint, you should think about it in a similar way. And so there's just going to be, it's nice for all of us to think that like we can take a sniper approach to recruiting and just like pick the 4 people we want to hire, hyper focus on them, and close 3 out of 4 of them. But the reality of the situation is it's like never been more competitive to recruit really in any market, and that it's sort of a candidate's market, so to speak. And so you want to get recruiters working for you, and it is worth the cost of admission. And it's just something to think about when you're either taking a new role or managing up, that you really want to help define the amount of work that sort of like recruiter is going to do for you. And so in the beginning, Zenefits, we had a couple SF-based recruiting firms doing a lot of this recruiting for us in Arizona, and I would take flights out there twice a week and hold full-on interview days where we would do, upwards of 10, 15 interviews and do kind of batch hiring. But it allowed me to really isolate and focus on being super present in the interview and making like conscious decisions to kind of, place the right bets on these people that we were hiring. And that combined with the support of the folks that I mentioned earlier who were kind of already high performers being involved with the process allowed us to get a lot of those early hires right. And that helped us along the journey.
Awesome, man. That's great. Two more things I want to talk about within Zenefits, and then we'll move on. As you're evaluating talent at that scale, so some people that are listening are going to need to hire 5 people in a year. Some people that are listening are going to need to hire 500 people in a year, or maybe even 5,000 people in a year, depending on the level of responsibility that they have. What's the calibration method that you found that is most useful or valuable as you're going through that level of hiring at scale?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think the thing that worked well for us in the beginning was not necessarily the thing that worked well for us sort of halfway along the journey. And that transition wasn't super smooth. And so I was sort of the single point of accountability or single point of failure or success, however you kind of want to state that, in that I made the hiring decision for the first 100 or so sales reps that we hired, where I was in every single interview. Right. And so as you can imagine, this absorbed like a ton of my bandwidth, but we were fortunate to have a lot of support in terms of like ramping and making reps successful and then hitting their numbers, and we're able to stay ahead of that. So I was able to do that. Handing off that sort of decision responsibility took quite a bit of calibration. Right. And I think that at the end of the day with recruiting, like it's nice for organizations to have a fully calibrated, well-oiled recruiting machine where you can kind of predictably make the same decisions about hires based on like an agreed upon set of criteria and principles. And I think that there's companies out there that do this really well. It's really hard to do during like a hyper growth phase. And I actually recommend to most folks that you hold on to sort of like a single point of accountability or a single decision on terms of this hiring, kind of as long as you can. Yep. And then as you get folks up to speed and you're able to sort of delegate out some of the hiring responsibilities, like do that. But I think it is really the single most important thing that you can do when you're at like a hyper growth stage, and narrowing that level of sort of responsibility for a decision down to like the smallest group of stakeholders possible. It may sound counterintuitive because a lot of bigger companies do this well, where it's delegated across many people. But in my opinion, I think it's better to hold on to it. And when you get to a point where you've got folks that are, because when you keep in mind, like we're hiring 30 new people to start on the first Monday of every month, but like, by the time we've got 100 people on board, like the most ramped folks that we have on the team have been there for 4 months. Now, this is like an experience and scale that like most businesses like won't necessarily have to deal with. But I think to some degree, many hiring managers have been in a position where the next most tenured individual just doesn't have like a ton of tenure. So you have to work with those folks and help them become owners and help them really understand that like as an owner of the business, like these are the specific things that we look for, and here's how you embody those certain principles, and those are things you need to work on. But for me, it actually was holding on to that as like one of the singular most important points of my job, kind of as long as I could.
Yep. Solid. I like it. The next one is on onboarding. So this is something that most people overlook and turn into a checkbox exercise. What did you do to make sure they were set up for success in the onboarding phase and anything after that? Anything you would include in that phase to make sure they were set up for success at massive scale as you were bringing a lot of people on board in the sales function?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a couple things. We had an owner of the onboarding program from day one. So awesome. One of the things that we did was we hired somebody into a sales enablement capacity as one of like the very first hires that we made. And they ran a 2-week boot camp where we put folks through everything from systems training to market training to kind of competitor intel to, pitching to live role plays. And we actually would have folks get like certificates. And this was something that we took really seriously because like kind of 2 reasons. One, it allowed us to create like a system of measurement where we can say, okay, if we are able to deliver like X amount of training, like what sort of output can we measure with Y, like, months down the line, weeks down the line. Yep. And that gave us actually a feedback loop that tied back into our recruiting conversations where we're actually talking about ramp success of people that we had recruited 3 months prior in recruiting meetings. And I think it's important that you've got that feedback loop of like success on hires all the way back to recruiters that isn't just like anecdotal, but it's actually like looking at the data of performance based on how these folks got ramped. So one thing was like just, creating an owner early on with sales enablement was critical.
Yep.
Systematizing it and having a way to kind of measure rep performance week over week and having benchmarks and then really sticking to those, making it clear that if new hires didn't hit certain criteria along this journey, in their first 3 months, there wasn't going to be a grace period. I mean, it really was, you needed to perform at a certain level, even in the early days. And so that wasn't so much putting numbers on the board in the first month as it was showing, competence and sort of learning and demonstration of ability to be coached and some of the things that we looked for.
Yep.
And so those were a couple things. And to be frank, like that onboarding program, we needed to tear it down and rebuild it every 90 days because, what we were measuring and what we were coaching on needed to be updated based on sort of how the business had evolved, because it was such a condensed time period during hypergrowth that you really have to constantly be looking at it through the lens of like, is the foundation correct? And do we need to rebuild it? And it turned out we needed to rebuild it every 90 days. And so it was a lot of work, but, it created a lot more relief for the managers of those people and for the people themselves, once they were able to pick up their bag, so to speak, and know that they had the skills to succeed.
Cool. One more side question on that. Is there like 3 things that you can say every person that is onboarding new sales development, sales talent, people within the sales and marketing org, or just generally onboarding? Is there a few things, maybe 3 things that you'd say that you have to put into or get right within your onboarding program or project?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the first thing is that like everybody needs a crystal clear understanding of like what their role is and sort of like what the value is that they're adding to the business. And hopefully this is something you did in the recruiting process. And it sounds kind of obvious, but helping people like understand like what it is that they're doing is so critical to the overall success of the company and the vision of the company creates a lot of buy-in early on. And for a lot of people, it's one of the reasons why they consider and decide to take a job in the first place is what's the impact that I can have? How is this going to help me grow personally, but also this business grow? And helping kind of create that reminder is, I think, really important. Helping people feel like they're helping people understand like how they can fail and that failure is appropriate, I think is really important too. And I think you have to define what that failure means, but people need to feel safe to fail. And by fail, I don't necessarily mean like fail to show up to work. What I mean is like fail in like an effort to do the right thing, right? So maybe you decide to call the CEO of a company that you're prospecting into, and you get a connect, and maybe your pitch wasn't quite as sharp as you wanted it to be. But at the end of the day, like you were doing the right thing. You were calling up in the organization. Like that's something that you want to celebrate and help people understand that like that's actually something like you're doing the right thing here. Now let's talk about how we can like perform better, in that specific scenario. And so creating that kind of an environment, I think is really important too. And then I think the third thing is you have to create a rigorous system of measurement. So it's like what a lot of sales leaders do is they'll pair up a new hire with the top rep on the team, tell them to sit in on demos and take notes, right, for as long as they need. And then after about 4 weeks, let's start like funneling demos to that new AE. Or if it's an SDR, let's start funneling leads to that SDR. And then it sort of just becomes this sink or swim type of environment. And you see this perpetuated, I think, at a lot of sales orgs. And it's understandable. I think that like most sales leaders are great at what they do because they're looking at the bottom line results, not necessarily like the top line inputs of pipeline or new talent. But if you're not really rigorous about like, these are the specific things that you need to do to be successful, you kind of like institute this feeling in a rep that like there isn't necessarily a repeatable playbook for success. And it's actually their responsibility to create sort of like a path to success. And so what ends up happening is every rep does something different. And when every rep's doing something different, you can't scale. And so you never cross that chasm from product market fit to repeatability to hypergrowth. And so once you've actually got folks doing things repeatably, now you can really like press the gas and sort of make things happen a lot faster because you've at least got the knowledge that everybody is sort of executing and selling in a similar fashion. But you can't do that unless that folks are getting ramped up the same way.